Scripture reading this evening is from Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 23. The Lord's word says the following. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "Command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit one on your right and one on your left." But Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "My cup you shall drink, but to sit on my right and on my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those whom it has been prepared by my Father."
You know, in this particular passage that was read just a few moments ago, we see James and John, and they don't really even ask the question themselves. They send their mother. And I've always kind of gotten a little bit tickled about that they had to send their mother to ask this question. But they send their mother to Jesus with a question. We believe that James and John's mother was the character that we see, or the lady that we see in the New Testament, by the name of Salome. And we kind of derive that through kind of a process of elimination on names. In Matthew chapter 27 and verse 55, Matthew is listing for us women that were looking on at the cross, and she mentions Mary, the mother of James, and Mary Magdalene, and then Matthew mentions the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Now, the sons of Zebedee are James and John, so their mother was there at the cross. Mark, in his account, Mark chapter 15 and verse 40, gives us the same list, but instead of calling it the mother of the sons of Zebedee, he just straight up says Salome. So we take those two lists together, and we make an inference, or we infer that her name was Salome. We could also look and see in John chapter 19 and verse 25 a list of women at the cross, and some of the same women are listed there. And one of those that is listed there is his mother's sister. In other words, Jesus' mother's sister, Mary's sister in this particular case. And so if that is the case, if Salome is the sister of Jesus' mother Mary, if that list lines up, and it's a little harder to line that list up than the other two, if that is the case, then she is Jesus' aunt. And that might explain some of it, right? That might explain some of the thought that she might have some kind of influence with Jesus in regard to this request that she's going to make of them. It also might have some explanation as to how close Jesus is with John and James. And we see John there leaning against his breast at the Lord's Supper. And so there might be something in that would show us why that may have come about over time, because they may have been cousins, if that is the case. Well, James and John's mother, she comes to Jesus, and she bows down. Jesus asks her, what is it that you want? And she says, "Command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit one on your right and one on your left." In other words, the positions of authority, the positions of power. And we even see that in regard to Jesus Christ, right? That He now is sitting at the right hand of the throne of God, as Peter tells us. And so we see that idea in where Jesus Christ is now at that position of power. You know, it amazes me that they ask this question, and we are literally just days from Jesus going to the cross. And with all that on Jesus, the pressure that is upon Him as He approaches the time of the cross, they are just about to begin what we would call the ascent. The Jews would ascend to Jerusalem. In other words, when you come in at Jericho, which is where they are, you come in at Jericho, then you climb a little over 3,000 feet uphill to where Jerusalem is. And as they went, they would sing the Psalms of Ascent. You may see those when you look through the Psalms. You'll see Psalms that says Psalm of Ascent. And that means that those are psalms that they sang as they ascended to go to the city of Jerusalem, to the temple. And so this is the time, we're heading to that moment. We're coming up to that last week, probably about 2 weeks from the time that Jesus dies. And this is the question that they have. That they're lobbying for position in the kingdom, and in a kingdom that they obviously do not understand. And it's clear they don't understand. They're still not going to understand it even 40 days after Jesus' resurrection, as Jesus is about to ascend in Acts chapter 1. They do not understand. When I think about this, I think that Jesus has to feel so alone at times. I really do. Because, number one, the disciples won't accept that He's going to die. Every time He tells them, they just completely reject it. They completely lose their minds, so to speak, or they argue with Him, or they say it's not going to happen. But here is Jesus, and the biggest thing weighing on His mind is His death, and the people that are closest to Him are just nowhere to be found in helping Him with it. There's no support. There's no encouragement. There's nothing but resistance. And no wonder that Jesus would say to Peter when He made that argument against Jesus dying, "Get behind me, Satan. You're not really helping me here, Peter." And so sometimes I think about Jesus in this, and we know how this weighs on Him. We see it in Gethsemane in its paramount moment, but that he had to feel so alone in this regard. Even with these men here, what's on His mind and what's on their mind are vastly far apart. They're thinking about position, greatest, where they're going to be in the kingdom. Jesus' response kind of sets forth a little bit of, I think we see some of the frustration that surely is going on in His mind in regard to these kind of silly questions as He approaches this terrible time for Him in His life. He says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't understand the kingdom. You do not understand that such motivations, such ideas, such longings or even desires to be in these great positions, that's not what I want. That's not what I have spent 3.5 years trying to teach you to be, is not the person that has the position of power, but the person who is the servant. Jesus over and over and over has told them that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and trying to teach them the humility that He wants them to have. And here they are. 3.5 years, his ministry is almost over, and He still can't seem to get it through to them. And I guess it's even worse, when we jump forward, right? And we come to John chapter 13, and Jesus is literally entering the upper room. He's going to be on a cross within the next 12 hours. And they're sitting there when He walks in the room, arguing about who's the greatest. That had to break His heart. To think that these are the men that He spent the most time trying to teach and to mold. And they are so far away from what Jesus wants. He says, you don't understand what you're asking. You know what I'm thankful for? Well, there's an old song by Garth Brooks. Thank God for unanswered prayers, right? I'm kind of thankful for that. I'm thankful that Jesus knows better than I know. And I'm thankful that things that I've prayed for at times didn't get answered. Because it wasn't the best thing for me. It wouldn't have been a great place or a great thing to happen in my life. And yet He knew that. And I'm thankful that when I don't know what I'm asking for, that He does. And He helps me in those situations. And certainly He's going to help these guys even in their ignorance in this moment. But He then asks a question. He says, are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? Mark adds, are you able to be baptized in the baptism that I am about, of which I'm going to be baptized? We think about this cup that Jesus asked them if they're willing to drink. There's two aspects to this cup. First is a cup of suffering and death. And I think that's really the focus of Mark's statement when he uses that term baptism, that term immersion. Are you willing to be immersed in what I'm going to be immersed in? the cross is going to be a complete and total immersion into pain and agony. And are you willing to do that? And we know that as Jesus uses this term, the cup, He uses it again in Gethsemane when He says, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. So He asks these men if they're willing to drink that cup, to be immersed in the pain and the suffering that the cross is going to bring to Him in just 2 weeks. And these two men, they answered that they were able to drink the cup. You know, they still don't even know what the cup is, do they? I mean, it's still an answer of ignorance. Men seeking to be in such high position and yet have no idea of the position that they're seeking. And they say, oh yes, we can drink the cup. And Jesus tells them that they would drink it. That they would know it. And James will be the first apostle to die in the book of Acts. So he'll drink the cup. He'll be put to death by Herod. John will know persecution in his life while he won't die from, as far as we understand it, he didn't die from persecution, but he suffered from it. He was exiled for it. And so, you know, he's going to understand the cup of difficulty, the cup of suffering, and even death for the cause of Christ. In the end, he would know that. And so these men they're told that they're going to drink it, and they do. But the second aspect of this cup is that it is not just a cup of suffering and death. It is a cup of self-denial. You know, the self-aggrandizing of James and John in this text is a little bit disturbing. That they would literally go up there and ask that kind of question. That they would literally try to put themselves in such a position. In verse 24 tells us that the other 10 disciples, they were mad at what James and John did. And let me tell you what, don't get on their side yet. Because you know why they're mad? Because they want those positions. These are the same guys that are going to argue about who's the greatest. I guarantee you, every one of those other 10 think they should be sitting on the right hand. They should be sitting on the left hand. They're not mad because I can't believe you'd ask such a question. Jesus has taught us better than that. No, they want to go the same direction these men want to go. These men just sent their mama, right? And so we see so much growth that needs to take place in these men. They wanted those slots. And this was a real problem. In verses 25 through 28, it says, But Jesus called them to Himself and said, you know, there's a very personal aspect to that in it. Come here, I want you to get close to me. I want you to talk about this. Calls them to Himself. He says, You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It's not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. In about a week, Jesus is going to walk into that upper room on that Thursday evening, and He's going to wrap a towel around Himself, and the God of heaven is going to get down on the floor and wash nasty feet to make a point. Make a point about servanthood. I'm the master. You're not greater than me, and yet I will get down on this floor and I will do the lowest job that there was. I will deny all pride and self to be the example, to be the servant that I so want you to be. And He sets that example for them on that night, and it's the very thing that He just said to them. Leaders in the church, and He's preparing them to be leaders in His church, the church that He is going to build through His death upon the cross. But leaders in the church are not to rule as worldly leaders by decree and by authoritative, by browbeating, by punishment. Leaders in the church, in fact, He says in verse 26 that we already read, it is not this way among you. Anyone seeking power in the church is making the same mistake that James and John made on this day. Making the same mistake that the disciples are going to make as a whole on the night before Jesus dies. Longing to be greatest. Longing to be over everybody else. Longing to have my way or the highway kind of mentality. That's the same mistake that these men make. It is not that way with us as the kingdom of heaven. You know, Peter learned this. And certainly that night there with Jesus, or that night as it went on forward in his denials and all the things that happened that night, I'm sure Peter spent a lot of time thinking about. But in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 1, Peter, as an elder in the Lord's church at this point, he's an apostle, he's an elder, he's a preacher. He kind of held them all in his life. He said, "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ." See, he's thinking about that night. "As well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock." It took nearly a lifetime. But Peter gets it now, right? He understands what Jesus wants. I don't need someone domineering. I don't need someone lording it, as some translations might say, over the flock, exercising authority in some powerful way, but being the kind of person that people follow because of the person you are, a servant. I'd much rather follow someone who is a servant than to follow someone who always wants to tell everybody what they think everybody should do. The person who serves is the person who has denied self to serve others and to be like Christ. In Acts chapter 20 and verse 35, Paul addressed this same thing when he spoke to the elders at Ephesus. And he said, "In everything I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that He Himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" Now, we use that verse. Sometimes we throw that out there in regard to contribution. And folks, that has nothing to do with the contribution. That's not the context of that at all. The context that Paul is using that in here is about serving in the church. That it's more important for you to serve in the church than to be given things in the church. I hear people say, "Well, what are you doing for me? What are you do? What's in it for me? What program do you have that I can be a part of?" And they're wanting. But Jesus says it's more blessed to give. What are you willing to do in the church? If people came to church looking for what they can do, I guarantee you they'd find plenty. But let me tell you, a person who always wants will rarely ever be filled. Because they'll get some things and then they'll want more. It's kind of a never-ending process if it's in your heart in that particular way. But He wants us to be giving service rather than receiving. Verse 28, he says, just as here in our text, Jesus says the same thing Paul says, just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to be served, but to serve and to give His life a ransom for many. Later, John, very much at the end of his life as well, would know a person like him. You remember, have you ever said to your kids, "I hope you have one just like you one day"? That's the mama's curse, right? Everybody has one. I had two. My mama was really good at cursing. Not that kind of cursing, I guess, but cursing me like, well, if she's watching this, I'm in trouble. We say that, and in this particular case, John has someone just like him. Just like him in this particular place. And his name is Diotrephes. In 3 John verse 9, it says that what Diotrephes wanted was the preeminence. Oh, John had to surely think back to some of his mindsets, right? Yeah, I sought the same thing. I even sent my mama to go and try to get it. I argued with the others that I was better than all of them. And here I am facing who I was when my Lord was on this earth. So he's dealing with Diotrephes there in 3 John, a man who sought the preeminence, a man who was causing him all kinds of difficulties. And I'm sure he thought, oh, the difficulties I caused Jesus by asking for something I should have never asked for seeking something that wasn't mine to take, wasn't mine to have. He saw how destructive that kind of person is in Diotrephes, and surely had thoughts about himself. You know, if we are to be true and devoted disciples to Jesus, we must not only be willing to drink the cup, but we must drink it. We must be willing to give our lives. To be, as John wrote to 7 churches, to be willing to be faithful unto death, to the point of death, if that's what it's called for. That I will do that and I will overcome because of it. But I'm willing to suffer. I'm willing to drink that cup of suffering if it's for Christ. But I also have to drink that cup of self-denial. I must deny self, and I really do think, folks, and this is my opinion, so you can take it or you can leave it, but I really do think that denying self is the hardest thing any of us ever do in our lives. And it also breaks my heart because I believe that so many Christians are going to fail because it's the cup they won't drink. Jesus asked, will you drink the cup? Their answer, whether it's verbal or not, is no. There's too many things I like to do. There's too many things I want to do. There's too many things out here that I just won't give up to be what you want me to be, Lord. It's hard to deny self. It's hard to deny. There are things that I want. And I have to fight against those things because they are things in contradiction to what Christ wants for me. And they're hard. And I hope, I would think that most of you understand what I'm saying there. So many people are going to do all the right things and be in the right places at the right times, and they're still going to miss heaven. That was the Pharisees. Pharisees, as far as what the law said, they were at the right place at the right time, doing the right things every single time. And yet they were nothing of what Jesus wanted. Because they had never denied self. It was all about them. And until we're willing to drink that cup, it's going to be a very difficult thing to ever be truly faithful. When we think about the Beatitudes, we see that in the Beatitudes there, as Jesus preaches the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, and he's trying to show exactly what he wants his disciples to be. The denial of self is in every one of the Beatitudes. It's required if I want to be blessed in those ways. Think about it with me. That you are blessed if you're poor in spirit. That's denying self. That's putting self, understanding what I am, that I'm spiritually bankrupt. There's nothing of value in me. Everything that I will find that is valuable in my life is going to be because of God. Because of Jesus Christ. Mourn. Blessed are those that mourn. The rejecting of self and the sin that I choose. That should cause me to mourn that kind of life. Blessed are the meek. That is the controlling of self. Being able to bring myself under control in regard to or in the way of Christ. To hunger and thirst for righteousness. Seeking guidance because I don't know the way. But I know the one who does. And I need His help. I wouldn't have needed to mourn if I knew the way to go. Merciful. To rise above the demands of myself. To show mercy to another. See, self is what demands me to get back at someone. Self is what demands me to retaliate. But the denial of self enables me to be merciful and kind. Blessed are the pure in heart. That's changing self into what God would have it to be. Blessed are the peacemakers. And that's putting others in God first. I'm going to make peace. I want to make peace with others. I'm going to swallow my pride at times and put my hand out to the person that I really don't want to, but I will, because I want to be right before God. It is to make peace with God. To deny self so that I might be what God would have me to be. I won't be in opposition to God. I will be one of His children. And the end result of all that, as Jesus finishes up those Beatitudes, is that there will be persecution. And that brings us back to that first aspect of the cup, right? And we will drink a cup that has to do with pain and suffering. That's a part of the Christian life. But it'll all be worth it in the end. Jesus said, rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven. You know, that is what it takes. It's what it takes to be a disciple. And when you understand that, when you know that, there's only one question to answer. Are you willing to drink the cup? That's the question Jesus asked. And it's the question each of us have to answer. If we can help you in that answer this evening, I hope and pray that you will let us as we stand and as we sing. Rise up and build the name of